Well, we're in Seaham today. We were in Hartlepool yesterday. We're here in Carlisle. Been in Eastwood in the Ashfield constituency this morning. In the key areas we're fighting, we're doing very, very well. I tell you what, the reception here this morning has been fantastic. The Brexit Party swept the board here in the European elections. But I think here in Hartlepool, Richard Tice, I think he can do this. Three things I want you to think about on Thursday. Number one, get out and vote. Every vote counts. Number two, get your friends, family, anyone you possibly can to go out and do it, whether it's raining hard or not. And thirdly, think about this. There are 130 seats in the country. The Conservatives have not won for the last 50 years and more, and they won't win them this Thursday. In those seats, it's the Brexit Party that is challenging Corbyn's Remainer Labour Party. We can win those seats if people vote for the candidate most likely to win and to deliver a real Brexit, the one we voted for. Without the Brexit Party's voice in the House of Commons, I don't trust Boris to deliver a proper Brexit. So let's do it.
Right, morning all. My name's Jake Pugh. I'm MEP for Yorkshire and the Humber, and welcome to our final formal press conference of the general election. Yesterday, the Prime Minister said that the BBC licence fee needs looking at, and there was a comment in one of the papers today that it was the first radical policy announcement by the Conservative Party of this general election. Well, I can only assume it was taken from here. The Brexit Party contract with the people, just like the idea of making significant investments into regional infrastructure, just like the review of HS2, which has now been commissioned as a result of our policy to abolish HS2, and even reference to reviewing the basis of the Supreme Court. All policies which we prioritised in our contract with the people. But there's good news for the Prime Minister. There's many more in here, and they're all oven ready for the 1st of February. Let me give you a couple of examples. On the 1st of February, we want the UK to take full control of its territorial waters. Well, it won't be able to do that because we remain in the common fisheries policy. We want to cut the cost of living for the poorest in society by removing VAT on domestic fuel. We cannot do that under the transition deal because the EU forbids us from reducing that VAT below 5%. We want to designate British steel as a strategic national industry. It currently has energy costs 60% higher than their competitors in France and Germany. We cannot do that from the 1st of February because of the continuing obligations under the state aid rules. Whatever happens on Thursday, we in the Brexit Party and all our supporters will continue to push for what the 17.4 million voted for, but most importantly, because of the opportunities that arise from leaving the European Union fully. Now, as you know, our campaign has been focused primarily on those Labour heartlands and what the perspectives are there. And we're going to show you a brief video now on the reactions on the doorstep.
It's lovely to meet you.
Good to meet you.
It's lovely to meet you.
And we want Brexit to happen, don't we?
We want it. I've already sent my postal vote.
Yes.
Very good.
And your daughter as well.
And my daughter.
Thank you, darling. I really appreciate it.
I cannot for the life of me see that man, the Prime Minister, that Labour man.
Yeah, Corbyn,
And she said I'd turn over in my grave before I voted Conservative. She said, I don't know what are we going to do. And not only that, I told my hairdresser the same.
Yes.
She came and she said, well, I don't know who I'm going to vote for this time. She said, I cannot see that fella being discussing things with Europe, she said.
Oh, yeah.
And she said, I couldn't vote Conservative either. So I said, well, we have voted for Brexit.
Excellent.
Ah, fantastic.
And I told my
Thank you.
hairdresser,
Thank you very much, madam.
Bad idea.
Very good.
Well, you made the right decision, if I may say so.
My postal vote have already
Lovely.
gone in.
Yes.
My daughter's vote have already
Fantastic, thank you.
all.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That really was, I mean, she wasn't young. She was not young, but she had it all with her. And it was very interesting, wasn't it? She had the conversation with a hairdresser, you know, and clearly comes from a long Labour tradition. I mean, her mother would have been the first generation of women to even have the vote, which is quite a thought, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
And, you know, Corbyn doesn't recognise him as being the Labour Party she's always represented, but can't, because of generations voting for the Labour Party, ever bring herself to vote Conservative, voted Brexit, and her postal vote, she said, has been sent off for the Brexit Party. And there she was. I don't know how old she was, but she was a lot, saying, Brexit, you know. It was the exchange of the day.
And that has been the reality of campaigning in South Wales, Yorkshire, the Midlands, right across those Labour heartlands. So before Nigel comes to stage, I'm just going to play you our party election broadcast.
When I was first elected to the European Parliament in 1999, we were told the EU was the future. But I could see how this undemocratic institution would damage our country. I've witnessed EU rules impact everything, from our northern industries to our fishing and coastal communities. I've been fighting ever since to get us out and make the UK an independent, self-governing nation.
Membership of the EU is bad for British business. Our interests are best served by not being a member of this club.
In the 2015 election, the Tories told my previous party to stand down, fearful we'd split the vote and let Labour in. We actually took more votes from Labour, forcing the Conservatives to hold the referendum. 17.4 million people voted to leave, the largest democratic mandate in British history. We thought we'd won.
Isn't it funny? When I came here 17 years ago and I said that I wanted to leave the European Union, you all laughed at me. Well, I have to say, you're not laughing now, are you?
But Parliament still blocks Brexit. That's why I launched the Brexit Party in April. Within 6 weeks, we'd won the European elections everywhere in England and Wales outside of London. We won more votes than Labour and the Tories combined. But as the political elites continue to betray Brexit, we continue to fight. In this election, there are around 130 seats the Conservatives haven't won in 50 years and will not win this time. We can. 5 million Labour voters voted to leave. They have been betrayed by Corbyn's Labour, who want a second referendum. These are voters in regions desperate for regeneration, for investment, for jobs, for infrastructure. Our 200 billion Brexit dividend will help solve these problems. You have two choices. Do you want a Brexit MP who honours the referendum, or a Remainer who wants to cancel the result? Only Brexit Party MPs can hold the Conservatives to account and get a real Brexit done. This is your one chance to change politics for good. Leavers, don't waste your vote. morning, everybody. They call it the Brexit election. Well, I suppose at one level it is. And that is there's a whole host of Remainer parties, whether it's the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrats or Plaid or the SNP or the Greens, because they all want a second referendum. And the Conservatives and the Brexit Party don't. But I have to say, that's pretty much where the Brexit election ends. There has been no discussion whatsoever of the withdrawal agreement or its terms. And indeed, I've been very struck by many of the interviews I've done and many of the comment pieces I've read that I'm not actually convinced that anybody in the media has read this document and understands fully what its implications are. And I suppose now here we are, 48 hours away from the election, and we're overwhelmed with negativity. It's kind of a classic first past the post. You think we're bad, look at the other guys, they're even worse. And the campaign has come down to a set of pretty meaningless slogans, conspiracy theories, and financial promises that are never ever going to get met. If I look and think about 2019, I think setting up the Brexit Party is in fact the reason that we're having this general election. I was pretty convinced back in February that Brexit was in the weeds, and I did think that a second referendum was coming down the tracks at us pretty quickly. And our success in terms of the way that we branded things, styled things, put on rallies, used social media, was indeed noticed. In fact, the Conservative Party have copied almost every single piece of it. And that goes for policy too. From HS2 to, did I hear, an Australian-style point system for immigration? Perhaps I'd heard that before. And yesterday we even heard that perhaps they'd have a look, of course they don't mean it, but we'd have a look at the BBC Charter. I have begun to wonder, do they actually have any ideas of their own? But in many ways, the fact that they're imitating us is quite flattering. And it shows the degree to which we have managed, as a very new organisation, to shift the centre of gravity in British politics. We've made a really very big difference. But there's one issue where we really have a problem with Boris Johnson and the Conservatives. You see, when he said a few weeks ago that we would be leaving in 2020 and that we would negotiate a super Canada Plus style trade deal without political alignment, I thought, ha-ha, we are beginning to get there. And in effect, if that's what they're going to campaign on, they'll effectively be campaigning on the same ticket that we are. And that was part of the reason why I decided not to stand against them in 317 seats. But there was a much bigger reason. Very simply, if you go to the fringes of London, you go to the south of England, to the southwest of England, you find that the Brexit Party overwhelmingly takes its vote from the Conservatives. And there are many still existing Conservatives out there that have their reservations about this deal, are unsure as to what get Brexit done really means. And I was absolutely certain that if we contested all of those seats, from South London, down through Surrey, out through Hampshire, and all the way down the Western Corridor to Land's End, that the Liberal Democrats would have won a swathe of seats. And if it was looking like the Lib Dems would win a swathe of seats, they may well have won more around the rest of the country. So our decision, my main reason for not standing in those seats, was to stop Joe Swinson and the Liberal Democrats dead in their tracks and to prevent a majority in the House of Commons for a second referendum. And indeed, Jo Swinson herself has said in the last couple of days that that decision effectively poleaxed the Liberal Democrat campaign. So when I look at that and think about that, I realise, difficult though it was the right thing to do. It was a case, genuinely, of putting country before party. But since that time, and I noticed in the very rare television appearance we saw from
both Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson on Friday night that he'd gone a long way. He'd stepped back from a Canada Plus style trade deal, and he was talking about his oven-ready deal. It's going to be put into the oven and ready before Christmas. All I can say is that will lead to many long years of indigestion. Because we will be trapped inside an international treaty. We've given Michel Barnier the upper hand, and already, if you look at the heads of government that are coming together in Brussels next week, they've already stated they're going to demand that we stay with full regulatory alignment on everything from financial services and taxation through to fisheries. Get Brexit done if it means this oven-ready deal simply isn't true. And much as it may be a very tempting slogan for a public that have waited 3.5 years to have this result delivered upon, I'm afraid that this would not be the way this should all end. In fact, if you think the last 3 years have been bad, you wait for the next 3 years of agonizing negotiations if we go through with this unamended. So our focus has been to go after the Labour seats, the Labour heartlands, with our message that we want a clean break Brexit from the European Union. Whether that comes in the form of a Canada-style trade deal, whether it comes in the form of WTO, that isn't the issue. The issue is that we're freed of the institutions. The issue is we're not paying any more of their bills. The issue is we get out of our liabilities with the European Investment Bank. The issue is we take back our 200-mile fishing limit. The issue is that we're actually free to become competitive again. Now, it's a word you'll never hear in modern-day politics. Nobody seems to understand business on either of the front benches. But this is our opportunity, particularly for 5.5 million small businesses and sole traders, for us to become a competitive global trading nation. And that is why, much as I want Brexit, I don't want to see Brexit sold out. And that message, along with the fact that Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party have broken every promise they made during the referendum, after the referendum, indeed, even in their 2017 general election manifesto, the message that the Islington-run Labour Party thinks you're all a bunch of morons in the north of England, and you didn't understand what you were voting for, and you must go and vote again, has gone down extremely badly. Interestingly, the other idea that really is working is the sense that Westminster is utterly disconnected from the real world, and that our entire political system, and that means our voting system, the way postal votes are conducted, the House of Lords, that all of these things need radical political reform. And interestingly, amongst many younger voters, even those that voted Remain, the idea that our politics is broken and that we must change politics for good is, without doubt, gaining currency. Now, I know that the London media story is that despite the fact we've gifted 317 seats to the Conservatives, that somehow, despite that, they still may not be able to beat Corbyn's Labour. And the story is that we will split the vote. Now, I heard this argument when I led UKIP back in 2015. We were going to split the vote and allow Nicola Sturgeon and Ed Miliband to form a coalition government. And when the scores came in, what did we see? We saw many of the Labour Party's highest target seats in England attracting big votes for UKIP and, surprisingly, big majorities for the Conservatives. And indeed, in 2017, when the UKIP vote had gone back to being a fringe number, Labour regained many seats that had voted Leave because their Leave voters went back to them. You see, the fact is, there are millions of Labour voters out there who simply cannot bring themselves ever to vote Conservative. They simply won't do it, just as in other parts of the country, there are millions of Conservative voters who could never bring themselves to vote for the Labour Party. That tribalism that our first-past-the-post electoral system has given us still runs very deep, and it's been within many families, generation after generation. No, far from splitting the vote, we're actually, in some parts of the country, making Boris Johnson's life rather easier. Now, they haven't won Grimsby for best part of a century, and yet they've got a chance of winning Grimsby, and Boris was there in Grimsby yesterday. Indeed, I think he's been following me around the United Kingdom, even visiting the same factories that I've been going to a couple of weeks before, but that's fine. Boris Johnson's Conservatives now have a chance of winning Grimsby, but only because the Brexit Party is going to take 20% of the vote there from nothing, and many of those votes are coming from traditional Labour voting fishing communities who will never vote for the Conservatives and would never vote for this withdrawal agreement, given that it doesn't get back our rights. And the same applies in many other seats. There are dozens of seats in which the Conservatives are now in a competitive position simply because we are ripping chunks out of that old Labour vote. But there are other Labour-held seats, and I'm thinking in particular of about 130 seats that have always been Labour, that the Conservatives have not won in living memory and are not going to win in this election. And I'm talking about the Blaenau Gwents, I'm talking about the Barnsleys, I'm talking about the Doncasters. These seats will not be going Conservative on Thursday, but in seats like this, we are the challenger. And the difficulty is, there is a split, and it's a split in the Leave vote, because if people in those constituencies vote Conservative, they may well stop us from getting over the line and in beating Labour. And by the way, do remember that I did offer a Leave alliance to the Conservatives back in August that would have involved us, them, and there were also some senior Labour figures that wanted to do this. You know, we could actually have put together a Leave alliance that would have won this election with a massive, clear majority. But it became clear to me that the Conservatives would rather take the risk of doing this themselves than making it easy for Brexit Party voices to get into Westminster. So my appeal is to Leave voters in those constituencies that have been Labour forever and will be Labour when you wake up on Friday morning, unless you use your vote tactically and sensibly. I'm urging Leavers in those seats. Leavers, don't waste your vote. And I've become, over the course of the last 6 weeks, ever more convinced that if the withdrawal agreement goes through as it is, we are in for years of agony, and we will see a huge campaign to rejoin the European Union on the basis we're accepting its laws, still paying the bills, and having no say whatsoever in the way those laws are shaped. I can see it right now. You know, the no taxation without representation argument will be the cry of the Remainers. I want to avoid that, and we can avoid that. We can avoid it by establishing a bridgehead of Brexit Party MPs in Parliament. It doesn't matter if there aren't too many of them. After all, there were just 3 of us that got elected to the European Parliament way back in 1999, and we used that to build a movement that forced a national referendum on this issue. I'm convinced that without the Brexit Party's voice, we will not get the Brexit that 17.4 million people voted for. I'm also convinced that in our strongest seats, we're going to get some over the line, and then perhaps we can get Mr. Johnson, if he wins a majority, which looks still very likely, to make some serious amendments to that political declaration, because we want a clean break Brexit from the European Union. That's what Brexiteers voted for. It's what Brexiteers want, and I won't rest until we get it. Thank you. Okay. If you take questions.
Right, thank you, Nigel. We're now going to take some questions from the press. If you wouldn't mind, please, giving me your name and your organisation. Sorry, I think it's that Christopher behind you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben Glaze from the Daily Mirror. Nigel, do you think you'll regret never becoming an MP? And when do you envisage going into the House of Lords?
Certainly don't want to go. I certainly, as far as the House of Lords is concerned, as I've said repeatedly and publicly, you know, the Conservative Party have tried to buy me off time and again over the years. Their difficulty is they don't really understand me. I'm not for sale. All right? End of. Simple as that. And as far as this election's concerned, look, our biggest weakness is that we're just 8 months old. You know, we haven't had time to build an organic branch structure on the ground. We haven't had time to build up, you know, pockets of local councillor support. So it's been, you know, it is a difficult campaign in that sense, obviously. So I could, if I'd wanted, to have said, right, that seat's our #1 target. I'm going to spend 6 weeks there. I thought it better that I went round the country and supported brave men and women who've decided to put their heads over the parapet and stand for us. And I think I've done the cause more good by doing that. And I must say, you know, when I make the comment, brave men and women, you know, we've seen some levels of intimidation against our candidates, the likes of which I don't think have ever been seen in British political history. Indeed, if it was South America, we'd all be calling for the United Nations to be called in as election observers. So that's what I've done. I've supported people the length and breadth of the country, and if some of them are in Westminster and I'm not, do you know what? I'm pretty cool about that.
Can I just add personally to that as well that I know from a lot of supporters and candidates who won't necessarily have the opportunity to contact Nigel direct. The whole might of the Tory machine is phoning up our candidates, intimidating our supporters, trying to get candidates to stand down. And so far, they've had success with 1 out of 274. It's totally backfiring. It's strengthening Brexiteer resolve. Christopher, next question.
Christopher at The Telegraph. 3 quick questions. How will you vote in Kent on Thursday, given you haven't got a party candidate to vote for? You had said you were standing 274 seats. You're now saying just vote for your party 130 seats. Will you publish that list? And if you get any MPs, which looks unlikely according to the polls, will they be whipped to vote against the Brexit deal? If that's the case, aren't you no better than Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, let's go in reverse order if we can. Of course, ultimately, if this awful oven-ready deal is passed by Christmas, it will come before the European Parliament in January. Because the European Parliament, despite everything we've been through, the European Parliament can still veto the withdrawal agreement if it chose to do so. Now, if other governments in Europe are happy with it, it's very unlikely to do so. And let me tell you, other governments in Europe are thrilled because Boris's withdrawal agreement is the original one that was put on the table. Mrs. May amended it because of the border in the Irish Sea, and it was she that put the backstop in. Boris took the backstop out, so we've now got exactly what Juncker and Barnier and the others wanted. They know they've got us. They know this is the most awful trap. Will I, when it comes before the European Parliament, vote for it? No. Absolutely I won't. As far as the 274 seats are concerned, look, I think if you vote Brexit Party, there are seats in which that will get us over the line. There are other seats in which, and people make their own minds up on these things, but there are other seats in which the very fact we're in the field is actually putting the Conservatives into contention. And it's an argument that I've used and tried over and over with you guys in London, and none of you here understand it. You did briefly after the 2015 election. There is this strange assumption in our media that Eurosceptics are all retired half-colonels living in Wiltshire, you know, out on the right-hand end of the political spectrum. Well, 1 or 2 of them are, of course. But the truth of it is, actually, there is a huge working class base of support out there for Brexit, out there for proper border controls, out there being resolute and patriotic in everything they believe in and their families have believed in and fought for generations. And they are the voters overwhelmingly that I've managed to get to support me in my career, be it with a UKIP hat on or now with a Brexit Party hat on, and they are just not going to vote Conservative. No, there's not a list of seats, but I tell you what, I can give you the 130 seats if you want that have never voted Conservative in living memory, and I'll do that within an hour of this press conference ending, all right? And your first question is the most difficult question of all. If Boris had stuck to saying we're going for Canada, we're not going to have alignment, I would have voted for him. But he hasn't done that. He has not done that, and so I'm not able to vote Conservative. I will spoil my paper. Out there in the country, you'll be surprised. Of course, given that most of our voters in the south and southwest, particularly East Anglia, given that most of them have come from the Conservatives, you know, a good number will vote Conservative because they'll see it as the least worst option. But I think a surprising number of them just won't vote at all because they just don't believe Boris, they don't trust him, they don't like this deal. I'll make a broader point, if I can, which is to all of us involved in this, whether we're standing as candidates or we're out there as activists or working in the media, we're all desperately excited by this election. And we're assuming the general public are desperately excited by this election. Well, I got news for you. A lot of people actually have completely lost faith. They don't believe a single thing that's being promised to them. And my view is the turnout will be a lot lower than most pundits expect. That bond of trust that needs to exist between the governors and the governed is very much at breaking point within our country. And it's why, beyond Brexit, I think wholesale political reform is something this country now has a huge appetite for.
Lady in the third rank. Yes, please.
Helen Catt, BBC. Couple of questions, if that's all right. The first one, your candidate in Lincoln last night, Rees Wilkes, said that he won't be asking people to vote for him, he'll be asking them to vote for the Conservatives on Thursday. So if you've still got candidates saying that at this late stage, how do you think you'll convince voters to do otherwise, is the first one. And the second one, Boris Johnson has been using that phrase, oven-ready deal, from the very start of the campaign. So what changed to make you think that he was going somewhere else with that midway through?
Well, two things. Firstly, he made a speech about it. Secondly, he actually put it in the Conservative manifesto. You know, I read it very carefully, and it talked there about going for a Canada deal and not having regulatory alignment. So I thought for a couple of weeks we were genuinely on the right track. Then on Friday night, in the head-to-head debate, you know, he made it very clear that it's an oven-ready deal. But he's still got 48 hours to persuade me. He's got 48 hours to persuade me that he genuinely wants a clean Brexit, and he would persuade many people who voted Brexit Party back in May the same. So there is still time. But it's difficult when someone flips and flops to this degree. As far as Lincoln's concerned, I can't imagine the pressure that individual has come under. All I can say is his statement this morning is a big boost to the Labour candidate. You know, in a city not too far from Lincoln, Peterborough, in the 2017 election, UKIP decided not to stand in Peterborough because the Conservative MP, Stuart Jackson, was a good, solid, reliable Eurosceptic. So they didn't stand against the existing Conservative MP. Guess who won Peterborough? The Labour Party. Because lots of those people who'd voted UKIP the time before then voted Labour. So I think candidates saying things like this at the last minute is a reflection of the sheer level of intimidation, actually verging on abuse, that ordinary folk are receiving in the shape of thousands of emails, unpleasant letters. I don't think we've ever seen anything like it before in British politics, in any election. I think it's pretty appalling, actually.
Yes, in the second row, please. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Farage. Emilio from Politico. The YouGov MRP poll a couple of weeks ago, maybe the most comprehensive poll so far in the campaign, it specifically said that in Tory target seats, the Brexit Party is hurting the Tories more than the Labour Party. It said that for every 1% you're taking off the Tories, you're taking off Labour, you're taking 2 off the Tories. Right? So surely is this not this 130 seats? Is this a sort of acknowledgement of that and something of a surrender?
Well, it's actually quite comical. I mean, some of the things that are being produced by the polling companies are, make great light reading. You read a piece of polling in a national newspaper and you see that the chief executive of the polling company was Dominic Cummings, his best man at his wedding, and that his wife co-wrote the manifesto. I mean, I throw that in for an example. Or the company that you quote to me a moment ago, and you find that probably the number 3 on the Conservative campaign is a non-executive director. Here's the point. So let's get this nailed down and correct. In East Anglia, in parts of the outer ring of London, in the whole of southern England, in the whole of the southwest of England, and, we're talking here about a very large chunk of the electorate by population. In those parts of the country, the Brexit Party support is, by a majority of 2 to 1, if not more, coming from the Conservatives. Yes, absolutely. I acknowledge that, I accept that, I understand that. And that's why I realised that the effect of us standing would be Ian Duncan Smith would lose his seat, Dominic Raab would lose his seat, seats like Guildford, Chippenham, and I could go on and on and on, the number of seats in that scenario that would have fallen to the Liberal Democrats. But you go to the coalfields of South Yorkshire, you go to parts of Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, you go to the valleys of South Wales, and there you see that our vote comes 2 to 1, if not a little bit more, from the Labour Party. So we're in this very odd position as a party where we draw support from different political traditions in different parts of the country. And I would also just add quickly that none of the pollsters in 2015 understood, in seats in Warwickshire, for example, what the effect of UKIP getting 10,000 votes would be. Oh no, I think the polls are impeccable, impeccable. And I think the fact that polling companies don't have to declare which political parties are paying them for advice or publishing polls, look, I think like many things in the world of Westminster, it is a very, very small, very incestuous circle of people who switch jobs from time to time. And I think we probably need a register that says, are polling companies genuinely independent, or are they working on behalf of political parties? But that is just a tiny part of what I'm talking about when I say we need to change politics for good. We've all lost faith in this, and these are the same pollsters, of course, who told us on the day of the referendum that Remain was 10 points ahead, who got the last general election wrong, who couldn't see Trump coming even when he was walking up the garden path. So we should take what the pollsters tell us, I would suggest, with a pinch of salt, but also ask a deeper question about their levels of neutrality.
If I may, I'm just going to add one point as well, that the insider's analysis is always of how do you look at the Leave vote by Conservative Labour, Labour, how that allocates by seats. Everybody's forgotten that there were a couple of million people who voted Leave in 2016 who'd never voted before. And if those people were fed up then, just think how fed up they are now. So this idea that everything neatly goes into a package is oversimplified. Next question in the second row.
Nigel Morris from the newspaper. Can I ask you to gaze into your crystal ball and give us your best guess what you might personally be doing in a year's time? Could you be leading the Reform Party?
Well, I put that idea forward that if we do get Brexit, even a rotten Brexit, then I think the name Brexit Party will be past its sell-by date. It will have been one of the shortest-lived political movements in British history, but it will have achieved part of its job. It'll be a partial success, if not a whole success. So I have touted the idea of the Reform Party, and I have put an application in to the Electoral Commission. And I do, honestly, I think 10 or 15 years ago, the talk about political reform would have been something that was perhaps limited to the Oxford Union. But I genuinely think, I was in Barnsley yesterday, talking to people about our political system. They all think it stinks. They all think it no longer represents them. Many of them think, or have thought, that voting is a complete waste of time because their votes are safe seats and they've never ever changed. So I do think there's a chance here to genuinely reinvigorate our political system. So, yeah, if Boris wins, puts through this shocking deal we will get something on the 1st of February that's called Brexit. It won't be called leaving, but it will be called Brexit. And I think then, yes, what I will do is turn this into the Reform Party, and from what I can see, what I've seen in the first 2 or 3 days of putting this out there, is there is actually quite a big appetite, not just amongst our supporters, but generally out there in the country, for real, radical political reform. Because we're not going to get any of it, all the while we have a House of Lords that's filled up with 600 of Tony Blair and David Cameron's mates. I mean, you know, patronage and peerages, I mean, we're almost back to Henry VIII. I think it needs to be brought into the 21st century.
And in the second row again, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Ben Kentish, The Independent. Mr. Farage, it seems very clear now that if there is a Tory majority, the deal that you say will lead to years of agony will be passed as it is. You seem to suggest that you were led to believe that wasn't the case. Do you feel that you've been misled by Boris Johnson? And if so, are you still happy to say to those voters in seats where you stood aside, this is a man you can trust?
Well, I haven't said this is the man you can trust. In fact, I said to your colleague from the Telegraph the opposite. You know, my feeling at the moment is this isn't particularly a man you can trust. But having said that, of course, I'd be horrified by the thought of Labour forming some grand coalition and giving us a second referendum with a choice of Remain versus Remain. So it's funny, actually, in this election, when you travel around the country, the one thing people will tell you is who they're not voting for. There's an awful lot of negatives out there and not many positives. And I would suggest to you that perhaps having a system that was more representative, you might see more positive politics. Look, I'm disappointed that he's backtracked on this Canada Plus trade deal. Very disappointed. But you know, I was thinking to myself last night, coming back down the motorway from York, and thinking about that very question that I thought might come up today. I still, on balance, think it was the right thing to do because in the south and southwest of England, we overwhelmingly take our vote from the Conservative Party. We would have given Joe Swinson and the Liberal Democrats the most enormous lift. They maybe could have built a big national momentum out of those seats they were going to win. They're now going to be lucky outside of London to win more than 1 or 2 of them. And if doing that stops a majority for a second referendum in the House of Commons, then from my perspective as a committed leaver, it was still, difficult though it was, and I said I didn't have unanimous support in the party for it, I can assure you, difficult though it was, I still think that it was the right thing to do, yes.
So we just got time for a couple more on the end in the second row.
George Ryan from the Press Association. Mr. Farage, since you made your announcement at the start of the campaign that you'd be standing aside Brexit Party candidates in current Tory-held seats, have any senior figures from the Conservative Party been in touch with you or other senior figures in the Brexit Party to try to get you to stand aside in Labour-held seats?
Oh yeah, I mean, look, I think the Conservative Party's view is that they should now own the word Brexit. But actually no party, not even the Brexit Party, can own Brexit voters. They come from a very, very broad range of backgrounds. I mean, I still think my idea of a Leave alliance would have just finished this off for once and for good. It would have been an overwhelming election victory. You know, he'd have had a 100-seat majority or whatever it is. But, you know, our party system is very tribal. And I talked to, people I know who've been sort of ERG types and said in the end to them, well, how can you vote twice against Mrs. May's treaty? How can you vote 3 times against Mrs. May's treaty and then in the end succumb? And the answer's the same every time. Well, yeah, Nigel, we do care about Brexit, but we also care about the Tory party. And I believe that if what I did in those seats was to try and put country before party in the sense that we've got to get this Brexit delivered or our democracy will never be the same again, I think what they've done at every step of the way is tried to put party before country. Now, it may well pay off, and they may well get a healthy majority, but if they don't blame me. I tried to make life very, very easy for them. They didn't want to play ball.
Right, I think we're done in that case. That concludes the formal part of the day. We're available to chat afterwards. and you know what to do on Thursday. Vote Brexit Party and change politics for good. Thank you.